Hello everyone, we are so excited to welcome you to Laravel Hyper today. So what's Hyper? Well, Hyper seamlessly integrates Datastar into Laravel in order to give you a feel of Laravel native reactivity. It means you build your web apps with Laravel as usual using Blade and controllers, but yet you have full reactivity as you would expect from an SPA or from Livewire, for example. So that begs the next question. What is Datastar? Well, Datastar is a backend agnostic front-end framework that enables you with any backend to be able to build server-first driven reactive system, a bit like HTMX, right? But Datastar also integrates front-end reactivity like Alpinejs. I like the anecdote whereby if you imagine Alpinejs and HTMX having a baby, that will be Datastar. All right. So a lot of talk, it is better shown than told. All right. So let's dive right into action. Well, what we have here is a fresh installation of a new Laravel project. All right. And it's supposed to be a counter. For what I know, counter are the best examples, kind of standards to demonstrate reactivity in any new reactive technology, right? So we are going to make this counter reactive. So as at now, we have a fresh Laravel installation, and I'm going to present the current setup to you so that we can flow along seamlessly. This had to be done so that we don't waste a lot of time in these things you obviously already know, right? So what we have as of now is we have our routes already built in. So what does that mean? When you go to the home page right here, all right, it's going to run the index method within the counter controller, all right? And in the counter controller, we have our index method already set up, which just renders pages.counter.index, all right? So as you will guess, right here, we are using Laravel Herd. So right here is our home page. And so it renders this view, and this is the view in question, all right? So it's a very basic view, as you can see. We have our counter right here, which is supposed to be this span right here with 0. And we have our negative button here to decrement the count. And we have our positive button here to increment the count. So what's the expected behavior? Clicking here should decrement this number progressively by 1. And then clicking here should increment this number progressively by 1. But as it stands, normally, nothing happens. All right? So this is where we need to start seeing Hyper in action. So how do we do this? So very firstly, we have to install Hyper. For that, I have the documentation opened right here at the level of the installation tab. And we're just going to follow the step, all right? So to install Hyper, you just need to do composer required MC codes Hyper. And we're going to open our terminal here and then paste it in our terminal right here. Perfect. So that's done. And with that done, the next step is to go ahead and publish the GS assets, all right? So the GS assets is what contains bundled Datastar GS assets together with the extended functionalities of Datastar from Hyper, all right? So that's all we'll basically need for now, all right? So we're going to come back here. And next, what you want to do in order to use Hyper is very, very simple, all right? Anywhere you like to use Hyper, just ensure that the layout that your page extends, all right, or the head of your page has the @hyper directive. Okay, and basically that's that. All right, what the @hyper directive here does is that it will include the JS assets you need to have all the Datastar and Hyper extended functionalities right built in into your Blade file. And it also has the CSRF meta tag included into your head for later use, which you will understand as we progress. All right, so let's get back to our counter right here. So as at now, again, when we click, nothing happens. What do we need to think about first? We have a 0 here that is kind of static, all right? It is just a manually written number. We need to have a way to make that particular 0 dynamic. And so to do that, we're going to create a variable which we will call in Datastar terms a signal, all right? A signal is basically a variable which is kind of connected to your UI in such a way that when it changes, your UI where you also implemented that variable change. So basically what we need to do now is to create a signal, all right, or a variable that when we click on plus, it increments, and when we click on minus, it decrements, all right? So how do we do that? With Datastar, Datastar has attributes called data signals, which enable us to do just that, create signals, all right? And so we'll say data signals is equal to, and what it expects is a JSON right here, all right? And within that JSON, you will write normal JSON to be able to create your signal. So key value pairs, all right? So let's call our variable count, and we'll initialize it to, let's initialize it to 1, just to make a difference. Or no, let's go ahead with 0, all right? We'll make it clear. So with this, we've created a variable called count, all right, that has a value of 0. As of now, we cannot see that, all right, but let's be sure that we see that very clearly. So here, I'm going to remove this 0, and when I remove this 0, we can see it from our interface that the 0 has disappeared, all right? And so to display a particular signal within an HTML tag, I'm simply going to add an HTML attribute here of data text, and I'll give it the value of the signal that I want to display. Basically, data text expects an expression, a JavaScript expression that will resolve to a value which it will display, all right? So you can write any JavaScript right within these quotes, all right? So in Datastar, in order to represent the value of a signal in these JavaScript expressions, you will need to prefix the variable name with $, all right? So we'll do not count, all right, but rather $count. And with that, you see the value 0 appears right here. But this time around, this 0 is no longer a static variable we've written right here. It depends on this dynamic variable from data signals, all right? Okay, so the next question is, how do we make it go from 0 when we click on plus to 1, click on plus again to 2, and so on, basically increment it, right? So what we want to do, we want something to happen when we click on the button, all right? And so Datastar, here is our button first, sorry, okay? Here is our button right here, all right? And so Datastar, for you to listen to any browser event, has prepared a data on attribute, all right? With this data on, you can listen to any browser event. All you need to do is to add column, the name of the event you want to listen to. So if it is a submit event, you will say submit. If it is a click event, you will say click. If it is a custom event which you yourself have created, you will just say column the name of that custom event. In this particular scenario, we want it for the click event. So we'll go ahead and say click, and we will say equal to. And the right within this quote, we want to be able to say what it's supposed to happen the moment we click on that button, all right? AI is already very, very informed about this. And so we'll go ahead and do $count plus plus because that's what we want, right? So if we go right here and we click right now on plus, that's it. That's all right? As simple as that. So as you may guess, on the decrement button, we just need to do exactly the same thing. All right. So just go ahead and we have minus minus, and now if I click on plus, I have plus. I click on minus, I have minus. No page reloads, and as at now, no server request. All right, all this is built-in reactivity, as I said in the beginning, just like Alpinejs. Awesome. Now let's give ourselves the challenge of making this reactivity driven by the server. For that, you remember when we said data on click, what is within these quotes is a JavaScript expression. Well, Datastar has provided us with actions that enable us to do HTTP requests. For now, for example, we want to do a post request to the server in order to be able to control this reactivity from the backend. And to perform any form of HTTP request with Hyper, all you need to do is to use Datastar actions. For that, you will do @post. All right. So as you might imagine, there is an @get, an @patch, @put, @delete. All right. There is an action for every HTTP method. Okay. And so for that, we're going to do slash counter. Sorry, if I can type slash counter slash increment, and this is the URL we're going to make a post request to. All right. So as you will expect, this implies we need to come to the web, right, and then listen for that action, exactly like that. Listen for that request, sorry, on that particular route, and then prepare an action at the level of our controller that will run when that request is made. Okay, so let's go right ahead and define the functions for that. So we will do public increment, and let me get that, but we don't need all of this information for now. Okay, good. All right. So as it stands, we've changed the code a little bit. Right now, if we click on the button, we expect it to make a post request to slash counter slash increment, and then our server, or that will make a request to this, and our server is listening for that particular request in order to run the increment method in our controller class. All right. So for us to see that this is actually happening effectively, we will try to do a dd increment method call here. All right. And so what we expect is that when we click on this button, we should have the dd increment method called. Let's go right ahead and try that. So when I click, nothing happens. All right. Click again, nothing happens. So with this paradigm, you should have the habit of always checking your console application. All right. So I'll go right ahead and inspect to see what might be the problem. And when I click right here, I see server response with a status of 419. So this 419 generally in Laravel is a CSRF issue. Okay. So that is why in the beginning I mentioned that the addition of @hyper right here does two things. I think we can see that practically right here. Okay, if we inspect our code, all right, and we go right to the head to see what has been added, you will see that right here, all right, you have you have the Hyper.js that has been added here, which are the JS bundles, but below that you will have, just a little bit above that, you have the CSRF token. All right, content equals to that. The purpose of this CSRF token is to enable us to auto inject our CSRF token in hyper extended actions, all right, of Datastar actions. So rather than using @post right here, okay, in the case you want a CSRF token auto injection, you just add an X. All right, and this happens for all non-get requests. So there is at post, there is at post X, there is at put, there is at put X, there is at patch X, and all those will automatically add a CSRF token. All right. So what do we get? Let's try and refresh that and click on plus again, and there you have it. Increment method called. Okay. So we're good. We're reaching our method, and so what's the first thing we're thinking about here? The first thing we're thinking about, we need a way to be able to get this, our count signal, all right, at the level of our server, so that we can just increment it by 1 and then send the new value back to the front end so that it can show itself here. So the issue is, how do we get it? Well, the good news with Datastar is that at every single request, Datastar does send every single signal you define right here, all right, to the server. So let's see that. If I go ahead, all right, and I go to the network tab, and I go ahead and click on the plus again, all right. So here you have it, and let's look at that request at the level of the payload. You will see that at the level of the payload, it has sent my value count 0, all right. Let's try to do this again by changing the value here. I'll have -1, right? So if I go ahead and do plus again, here you have it, and you have count -1. So Datastar will automatically send the values of all signals with every request to the server. All right. So basically what we need right now is a way of reading this value at the level of our method so we can do with it whatever we want to do. All right. Let's go ahead and do that. All right. So to read this value at the level of our server, Hyper provides the signals helper. All right. This signals helper will enable us to read that value. All right. And the signals helper work a lot like the request method. All right. So what you have here are basically, if you know how to read values from your request when you're submitting forms with standard Laravel, then most of those methods in the request will work right here with our signal. All right. So what do we get, for example? If I want to get all of the signals that were passed, I will just go ahead and do signals all. All right. And so let's try to put that within our DD. Okay. So we can display that. So for now, let me remove this. And we got that. So refreshing the page and then clicking on plus again. And we have just that, count 0. All right. And let's change the value here and click on plus. And we have just that. All right. So at the level of our server right here, if we need to read all signals that have come with a particular request, we just say signals all. But in this case, we need just the value of count. Okay. So for that, I may remove all of these and just indicate right within signals the value of the signal that I expect to get. All right. And I can even give it a default value in case we don't find that signal in the list of signals. All right. Let's try and see that in action. This time around, when I click on plus, we have just 0. All right. Again, changing the value, click on plus, we have just -1. Okay. So let's go ahead and implement that. It means right here, I can remove all of the DD and just create a count to be equal to signals of count that, and that should work. All right. So what do I want to do with this count each time we click on increment? Well, we basically want to set it to 1. All right. As simple as that. Now, we've read our value from the front end. We've incremented it. And therefore, what do we need to do next? We need to update that signal. All right. To supply the kind of response that Datastar expects in order to update this signal, there is a built-in Hyper helper, all right, which you will need to implement. So for that, we'll go ahead and say return hyper. And this hyper comes with tons of methods in order for you to effectively implement server-driven reactivity. All right. For now, all we need is a way to accurately update our signal count to this new count value which we've just computed. All right. And so to do that, we'll go ahead and say signals. Okay. Hyper signals. And here, that's all. Hyper just expects, okay, the count. You indicate the value of the count signal as the key, and then the value here represents the new value you want to give to our signal, our count signal in the front end. All right. And basically, that's it. That should just work. All right. So let's see that in action. If I go ahead and refresh and I click on plus now, there you have it. All right. But this time around, what happens? This happens via the post X and not via the front end. All right. The reactive front end. So everything works as expected. All right. And so let's go ahead and do the same for the decrement. All right. So when we were defining the web routes, we automatically define a route also for the decrement action. And so let's go ahead and just, copy right here. You didn't really need to copy all that, but well, let's just do that and implement decrement. And at the level of the controller, we can do exactly the same thing as you might guess, changing just the essentials. All right. So we have that, and it will be -1 instead for decrementing, and we still update the count signal to the new value of count that we have right here. And just like that, you have it, your server-driven reactivity from Hyper. Isn't that beautiful? You tell me if that's just not beautiful. All right, but let's take it a little notch further. All right. So let's say right now we don't want to be able to decrement below 0. All right. So at 0, we don't want to be able to decrement. Okay. So that calls for validation, right, of our count signals to make sure that if the count is 0, then we should not be able to decrement. We should have a validation error. All right. So Hyper supports Laravel built-in validation system, okay, on signals. Again, what you will imagine for the request may just work for signals. All right. So for that, we'll come right here to decrement, and our signals helper, okay, our signals helper does have, okay, a validate method to which you can pass rules as you will expect as an array, not this way, okay, in order to validate your signal. So we will say for the signal count, we want it to be required, and an integer, no, we are not here for all this. All right. So what do we want to validate here? We want to validate the fact that the minimum value for this integer, okay, let's say it's supposed to be an integer in the first place as a validation, and then we'll say the minimum value for this integer, okay, should be 1, right? If we say min 1, it means that if it comes to 0 here, then we should have a validation error, right? Just that the message will not correspond to what we expect, but we'll solve that. So let's go ahead and see this in action. If I go ahead and I click on minus here now, nothing happens. All right. Why? Because this doesn't satisfy what we expect, but we don't see any message at this level. We would like to display the message so at least we know what's going on. All right. And so for that, you will meet your first hyper extended, okay, functionality of Datastar, which is what we call data error. Data error is meant to display validation error for particular signals. All you need to do is to use the data error and the name of the signal, and if there is any Laravel validation error, it will display at the level of the data error. Okay, so we'll go ahead and implement a div right here. Let's just give it a class, a tailwind class of text red 500 to speak of error, and then we will simply add the attribute data error, and we'll give it the name of the signal that we want, whose error we want to see. All right, and so we have that. And so let's go again, and if I click minus here, you see the count field must be at least 1. All right, this doesn't quite appear where we would like it to, so I'll go ahead and implement a flex call here rather, okay, so that we can have our error displaying under and not down. Okay, good. So the count field must be at least 1, but this is not the error we want to see, right? So what do we want to say? We want to say you can't go below 0, something like that. All right, and so this validate method works exactly, I said again, exactly as what you would expect for the validate method of Laravel. So for this, we'll go ahead and add exactly count.min as the message. All right, count cannot be less than 0. Let's go ahead and see that. And so if we implement that and click on minus, then we have count cannot be less than 0. Isn't this amazing? Right? So I think we can do the same for the increment, so that we restrain our count within a certain interval. Let's say between 0 and 10. All right? So as you will imagine, I will come right here, copy this, okay, and paste right here, and this time around I will say count cannot be greater, all right, greater than 10, and try that again. And so if I go plus 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 and I reach 10, count cannot be greater than 10, and there you have it. All right, you have validation errors that are built in right into Hyper. All right. Excellent. So far we've used signals to be able to update our UI. All right, we've just used state, we've just used variables that update our UI reactively. All right, I want us to take a completely different approach that is more HTMX like. All right, so we will use the DOM itself. All right, we'll use HTML to be able to have the same server driven reactivity. That's the next challenge we are giving ourselves now. And so for that, at the level of our index, all right, I want us to remove everything that has to do with the data signals. All right, and so for that, I'll go ahead and remove this. I'll go ahead and remove this data text. All right, and let's put our 0 back right here. Okay, so we are back to this. Now what do we want to do? We want to be able to update this count right here, okay, but using just HTML. And so for that, we still need this count to be some form of variable, but this time around it won't be a signal. Let's use Laravel as usual. All right, so within our index, we are going to send in a count variable as data. All right, and so for that, I will just go ahead and say, well, good, count 0. Okay, and with this count 0, it creates a variable. It gives me access to the $count variable at the level of my front end, which I can simply use blade, all right, to display right here. Okay, so we'll go ahead and say $count. And here we have it. All right. So the goal now will be to update at the level of clicking to increment, for example, to update this span, only this span, okay, sending in the new value of count right here. How will I possibly achieve that? Well, with Hyper, you can go ahead and put this span within a fragment, okay? And let's give a special ID to this fragment that we will call count, all right? And then we'll say n fragment. So this fragment makes this particular part of my view to become a reusable component, all right? It means when I want to send a response, I'm able to target just this part, all right? And so at the level of Hyper right now, let's focus on incrementing for now. At the level of our increment function right here, the first thing we want to do is that we need to be able to read the value that comes from count, all right? And so for that, we will need to change our URL a little bit, all right? In order to add a dynamic, we need to add a dynamic variable to our URL, all right? And so for that, I'll go right here and then add $count, okay? And then make sure that my URL can capture that. Come right here and here. We'll go ahead and add a dynamic URL count, okay? And obviously, that means at the level of our index now, we need to go ahead and add that value right here by concatenation, all right? So remember, we need to use a plus here and not something else, because we are actually within JavaScript inside this quotes, all right? And so the plus here, this is still blade templating, all right? So the count value will be displayed here and concatenated to this string right here. So we are good, okay? All right, so let's just make sure for now that we are actually reading this count value. And so for that, I'll go ahead and dd $count. And if we refresh this right now and click on plus, then effectively we have our 0, all right? So for the sake of simplicity, let's remove all of these and just go right ahead to what we're trying to achieve, okay? So it means, since we're incrementing the new count, all right, the new count will have to be, okay, let's have it this way, integer version of count plus 1. And let's see that that still works, all right? Let's just implement the dd of count again, okay? Refresh the page and click on plus, and we have our 1, all right? Oh, good. So what do we need to do right now? We need to send the response, all right? And the response we want to send here is this piece of HTML. Why? Because this is the HTML that will change, that we want to be reactive, all right? It is just this part, only this part that we want to change, because when we click on plus, this is what is supposed to increment to 1, all right? Hence, the reason why we are putting it in this fragment, because this part is supposed to be simultaneously the part which is supposed to change this and also the part which is supposed to change in the front end. All right? And so here, what we'll do, Hyper comes built in with the fragment method that enables us to do just that, update UI from a fragment, all right? And so as you can see, the very first thing that's expected is the view, all right, from which we are getting this fragment. And our view is simply pages dot counter index, all right? And the next thing we want to indicate is the name of the fragment, we've given the name of the fragment to be count. All right, and the next thing again we want to indicate is the data that we want to send in this fragment. All right, so let's just say count. Okay, if I can press RZ here. All right, so we have the view from which we'll get our fragment from, the name of the fragment we want to send back, and the value. So as you will imagine, we are computing this span with the new value of count, which is supposed to be 1 if we increment. All right, and so that is what the backend will send to the front end in order to update this part. All right, but as at now, this code is finished. It's finished right here. But you'll see that with that, if we click on plus, nothing happens. All right, but why does nothing happen? If we go ahead and inspect, okay, and come to the console, then we have a warning here which says patch elements, no targets found. All right, so though ideally this is supposed to happen, we need a kind of logic around this. All right, how does this response that comes as this particular fragment knows exactly that this is the part of the existing UI that it is supposed to update? Well, for us to solve that within Datastar, we just need to give this an ID. All right, and let's give it an ID of count. All right, ID of count here implies that the moment we are first rendering this whole page, we have an existing span that has a value of 0 with an ID of count. All right, and now when we click on plus, we are sending back that fragment, the fragment which is this HTML that goes back to the front end, this time around with the value of count equals to 1 here, still has an ID of count. All right, and so by default, I'm saying this by default, all right, because Datastar has other modes which you can use to swap HTML responses into the DOM. So by default, Datastar will identify that your response has this particular ID, and so look for that ID in the existing DOM and simply replace with the new response. All right, and so as of now, if we click on the plus right here, this should just work. All right, as you can see. Okay, but this works just once. Why is that? Well, that's simply because at this level, it is just this HTML that changes. All right, and this other part doesn't, which means the value of count here is still 0. I think we should go ahead and open the inspect in order to see this live. All right, so let me go ahead and inspect, and we are here, and we have our button here and we have our span. All right, so look at this. The link of the button is counter request plus 0, very simply. All right, so this is the 0 it's sending. But when we go ahead, look at the span very carefully. When we go ahead and click on plus, then the span value changes to 1, but the button is still at plus 0 because we've not updated this fragment. All right, so just for the sake of illustration and in order to reduce the overall length of this video, since this was just an introduction to Hyper, all right, let's go ahead and just make sure that it is the whole of this div, all right, that changes. That changes at every single click. All right, so we are going to add this around. It is still fragment count, okay, and so let's put our ID of count on this instead. All right, by the way, the ID can be anything, all right, so long as it's an ID, so county if you want to. Okay, and yeah, let me remove this and let's see that in action now. All right, so when we go ahead and click on plus, that happens, and just like that it works. All right, so as you will imagine, we can do the exact same thing for the decrement. Okay, so so much more we have to share with you on the functionalities of Hyper and how it brings built-in reactivity to Laravel as usual. But we'll have to stop here for now, and in the incoming tutorials we'll most certainly reveal all of the goodies that we have for you within Laravel Hyper. We thank you very much. This is a love letter from Dancy Codes to the Laravel community. We hope you really take time and try, and we hope you love it. Any issues, you know what to do. Get help, you just signal us, or by email or by comments. Anyone, we are open and available to make this the perfect product. So thank you very much, and see you in the next one.